What's up, everybody? Your favorite Bitcoin writer here, Dadu, and you're now listening to the Bitcoin Source podcast. More than ever, people are adopting Bitcoin, learning about money and sovereignty in the process, including myself. On this session, I sit down and talk with Dr. Mark Stephany, a good friend of mine and the founder of the Progressive Bitcoiner podcast. In this session, we really break down sovereignty, how that is important for your health, and how that is important for adopting Bitcoin. We also get into the weeds of what is Bitcoin for his generation? Why is Bitcoin important for his generation? And we also get into a lot of fringe topics around, people actually needing a certain hierarchy of needs before understanding and truly adopting Bitcoin, and how Mark and the Progressive Bitcoiner podcast is kind of being a conduit for things of that nature. So he's really big on helping people in the Bitcoin ecosystem become orange pilled, but also very progressive and liberal in the senses of he wants fairness, he wants unity, and he wants positivity throughout his community. And he's using Bitcoin to fuel such things. So let's get into this episode. It should be great. Hi, Mark. How you doing? Welcome to the Bitcoin Source. For the audience, for the world out there, let everybody have like a brief introduction of who you are, and we'll get into it.
Thanks, Dadu. I appreciate you having me on the show. I'm excited that you're starting your own thing. It's fantastic to see. Yes, my name is Mark Stephany. I'm just coming off of a week of night shifts. I'm a physician, and so I just did a full 7 days of 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shifts, and so I'm a little dazed and confused. But I'm gonna put my best foot forward here and try to bring a great podcast episode. So yes, physician by training, 10 years in, and Bitcoin class of 2017. And I'm the host of the Progressive Bitcoiner, which is a podcast that's focused on how people use Bitcoin to foster positive changes for themselves as well as their communities. And that's been going on since December. And you were one of my first guests. And so I'm incredibly proud and honored to be here with you on yours.
Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate it. And, to kick things off, I'm always curious to know, like, how Bitcoiners have sourced their knowledge or where they've, gained some insight on Bitcoin, adopting it either, from books, conferences, courses. So could you elucidate on, like, some of the books or conferences or courses or inspiration that you've had that's allowed you to be a better Bitcoiner?
Absolutely. This is always a fascinating question to answer. And there's a lot of great Bitcoin books that are out these days that weren't available, even a few years ago. But now having the benefit of hindsight, I think it's important when asking this question and not only talking to people who've been in Bitcoin for a little while, but also newcomers to the space is really to back up and ask the question, what is the problem that Bitcoin is trying to solve? And Bitcoin is fundamentally trying to solve the problem of money. And so then one must ask the question, what is money? And how do I better understand that? And money, in my opinion, is a technological issue. It is a monetary, obviously, and as well as a social phenomenon. And so you need to come at Bitcoin through all of those various elements. And that sounds like a very daunting thing to do. If you're talking to somebody at a coffee shop or a bar and they're asking you about Bitcoin, and you got to first read these half dozen books and you got to read these other half dozen books, and, then you'll understand it. Like, that's just not going to work. And so I think it starts with a simple understanding or question of asking the person, what they believe money to be, and really trying to better understand what motivates that individual, what their worldview is, and then tie in what money is as it relates to their sentiments and their beliefs. And ultimately, without a doubt, one cannot ignore the importance of what money is and the understanding of how it permeates our lives, no matter what your belief systems are. And so if you've reeled that person in at that point, then I think you can really start laying out various books and resources to to recommend. And so, in my opinion, starting with the history of money is foundational. Those books, those resources, I think are paramount. You cannot understand Bitcoin without coming to a better understanding of the history of money. And if you have zero knowledge of that, then I recommend a book called Coined, which I think is very well written. It comes with a lot of great stories, analogies, and is a great overview of the history of money. From there, of course, I think you have to read The Ascent of Money by Neil Ferguson. That is required reading, in my opinion. And then from there, you can get into articles like Nick Szabo's pieces, and of course, Price of Tomorrow, which starts to flesh out not only the history of money, but how it relates to our current everyday society and financial positions. So those are the main books on money that I would recommend. If you want to go even deeper, then there's David Graeber's 5,000 Years of Debt. The History of Money are also very, very good. But I think you earn certificates of completion once you've finished all of those. But like I said, money is also a technological phenomenon. It's a psychological and sociological phenomenon, and so it's important to understand those elements as well. And from the tech side, I think not only The Price of Tomorrow is very important, but books on technology in general. And for that, I would recommend Scale by Jeffrey West, which talks about systems, complex systems. It talks about scaling laws and all those things. And what I gleaned from those books were basically, to put it simply and almost in a trite manner, is the complexity of life and the law of unintended consequences, that we seem to think of things as simple solutions, but they are by no means that straightforward. Matt Ridley's books are very good as it relates to technology and better understand the evolution of those things. And then Innovation and Its Enemies is fantastic as well. From a sociological, psychological standpoint, any book on better understanding motivation, what motivates humans, our biases, our cognitive biases, our tendency towards making errors, predictably irrational, books like that I think are very helpful. In addition, Thinking in Systems by Donella Meadows is fantastic as well. So that's the long litany of books that I would recommend. And once you've kind of gotten through there, maybe you've sprinkled in a few Bitcoin books along the way. And from that, you cannot not read Andreas Antonopoulos' book, The Internet of Money. You're fantastic. The Little Bitcoin book is a great way to start out. From there, Layered Money by Bhatia. And then, from my perspective and from the center left perspective, obviously, Alex Gladstein's book, Check Your Financial Privilege, would very much be the next step in your decision tree of understanding of Bitcoin. So long-winded version of your question. But again, I think it's really important that in order to know why Bitcoin is good, you have to understand what problem Bitcoin is trying to solve. In order to understand what problem Bitcoin is trying to solve, you have to understand the history of money, what money is, and all the elements that go into it.
Yeah, most definitely, Mark. And what I find most profound about your approach and the way that you study and source your Bitcoin knowledge is that you're very literature heavy, documentation heavy, and money is just an idea, right? And I think that by you stating some of the processes of why Bitcoin and what is Bitcoin trying to solve, people have to understand where that idea comes from and what that idea means to them. So I truly do get it when you say, people have to kind of go through the economic basics first before trying to really compound the understanding of, Bitcoin as a whole. So yeah, that's some great insight there, Mark. That kind of leads me to my next question. So I'm aware that you're a physician by day. Bitcoiners are big on sovereignty. And how has the medical profession, you being a physician, how has that changed your overall look of sovereignty in Bitcoin and how that could transfer into your overall health?
Again, another great question. And For me, it was the other way around. I had not looked at health in this way until better understanding Bitcoin. And so it was better understanding Bitcoin that allowed me to understand the idea of sovereignty as it comes to one's health. And then, so if you define sovereignty as the full right and power, classically speaking, of a governing body over itself without outside influence, how do you apply that to your health? And moreover, why should you apply that to your health? Well, you have to understand, again, that the medical system, much like our economic system, is not necessarily optimized for the individual. The medical system is not optimized for health. It is designed to treat acute medical issues. It is designed to treat disease. That's not necessarily a good or bad thing. It is what it is. That's how it's evolved over the centuries due to various incentive structures. Of course, you could play out the counterfactual. If those incentive structures were different, would we have a different system? Of course, but we are left with what we have. And so my emphasis on taking ownership of one's health is based upon that understanding that you will not obtain optimal health by relying on the medical system. That's not what it is designed to do. You need to take ownership of that, which, as I tell my patients, is both scary, daunting, but ultimately it's empowering, because you alone have the greatest influence over it. And why is that important? Well, the same way that it's important to take ownership of one's money is that by outsourcing that responsibility, you are in turn left with the potential downsides of mishandling, lack of understanding, of all the other reasons that can be problematic when not taking ownership of one's money. But from a health perspective, I think there's this sentiment within American society that we will be able to we'll be okay within the medical system, that it's going to manage our not only disease states but optimize for health. And again, I try to stress to people, and my patients included, that I see people on their second, third, fourth heart attack despite optimal medical therapy. And the choices that you make in your life, your lifestyle choices, what you eat, do you smoke, do you drink, do you exercise, how good is your sleep, your stress level, all of those have a greater influence over your health than what I do as a physician. And it has more impact on your health than your genetics as it relates to chronic diseases such as heart disease, diabetes, etc. So you alone have the greatest power over your health. Why is that important? Well, it's important because everything downstream from your health is affected by it. So whatever role that you have in life, whether that's father, brother, your job, however you identify, is affected by your health. If you don't show up in optimal health, you are not doing the best you can with regard to those roles. And so it's very much a hierarchy of needs situation where foundationally everything else is built on health as a basic need. And in order to optimize every other role in your life, you need to optimize your health. And the person who's going to do that the best is you. And I want to fully acknowledge and stress that that is a harder choice, more challenging for different people, depending upon their socioeconomic position. I fully understand that. Unfortunately, health these days is very much an economic situation. It becomes more and more evident that health is something that you afford, right? I can afford to buy healthier foods. I can afford a gym membership. I can afford leisure time to exercise, etc. Many people don't have that. But there's always something that you can do, whether that's quit smoking, whether that's reduce alcohol consumption, whether that's simply walking around the neighborhood to optimize from an exercise perspective. So there's always something within that spectrum, and that something helps. It's about a pattern of living, not necessarily one single thing that's going to tip the scales to better health. So my message to people is this. The medical system is not designed to optimize health. We do a decent job of treating acute situations, trauma, and cancers, etc. But we do a terrible job at promoting health and prevention. And that's just the way the system's designed. It's not some, malevolent actors out there trying not to do that. It's just not what the system is designed for. And so if you think about your health as a Venn diagram, you've got a big component that is the medical system when you need it. You've got a component that is your genetics. Biggest component of that, though, is you and your lifestyle choices. And every day that you wake up, you need to choose those things that are going to optimize your health. Again, why? Because the things that matter to you most are entirely dependent upon how you show up to them. And that is dependent upon how healthy you are. Your health is the governor on everything that you care about in life. And what that means is something that I see every day at the hospital. The people who give and sacrifice their own health ultimately break down and are unable to be there for their loved ones and the people that they care about most, which is an incredibly sad situation to be in. So while we may think that taking care of oneself is a selfish act, ultimately it allows for you to be the best person for others. It's in my opinion, one of the greatest ways that you can show love for another person is by taking care of yourself. So self-sovereignty as it relates to health means taking ownership of your health so that you can be the best person for yourself and for others.
And I just love that I posed this question to you, because when you think about low time preference, you think about Bitcoin and how Bitcoin is such a slow process over time. People need to really realize that as a Bitcoiner, you want to live to see this thing get to hyper Bitcoinization. You want to be healthy. You want to be robust. You want to be able to provide for your family and not be, taking tons of medication or not being fully aware and in tune with your body. So, you as a physician, I'm grateful and honored to get your insight on that, because I think a lot of people are so focused on the rat race. They're so focused on making money and seeing number go up, and they're not really paying attention to their health, because, health is wealth. And that's the first set of wealth when you really sit down and think about it. Like, you could be a millionaire, but if you're bedridden and sick, it doesn't matter. That money doesn't really have the same effect on you if you're healthy and you're able to go use that money to do things and to give back to people. So, I really appreciate you, Dr. Mark, for kind of like breaking down that portion of sovereign health in connection with Bitcoin. My next question is, what are some of the common misconceptions around Bitcoin and the progressive movement?
The misconceptions are the ones that we're all familiar with as it relates to the environment, as it relates to, Bitcoin is just for criminals and money laundering, scams, Ponzi schemes. There's nothing necessarily novel from, I think, the progressive side that is different from any other group. There's probably a greater emphasis on the concern for the environment within the progressive movement than there is, say, the other elements. But I again think that this is a product of assuming the past is going to the future is going to be the same as the past. What do I mean by that as it relates to this question? Well, from the progressive side of things, I think we think that if we keep doing what we have been doing, if we keep trying to protest, if we keep trying to get into the same people or better people into political positions, we'll have better outcomes. What has become crystal clear is that voting is necessary, but not sufficient. Protesting is necessary, but not sufficient. It is necessary to try to reform our current institutions, try to elect leaders that aren't sociopaths. But it is not sufficient for change. Oftentimes what is sufficient is a systems change, is completely coming at it from a different perspective. And so I think for many of us, since 2008, 2009, we've understood this, that we had our great hope in office and it didn't work, right? And for many of us, that allowed us to reflect on why. And very much like the medical system, our current political economic system is not designed to get the outcomes that we desire. And we can argue till the cows come home, about restructuring our current system and how we could better do that. But at the same time, we should not discount other means of obtaining the same ends. And that's the whole point of my podcast, is to allow people to better understand that there's different means to the same end, and we should not discount those. And so I think a lot of the misconceptions stem from that we don't keep peeling away the layers of our concerns. If we care about the environments, okay, maybe it's more than just rules and regulations. What more can we do to help solve this? How does it relate to incentive structures? How are there other technological solutions to the same problem? If we truly care about the problem, we should be solution agnostic. And I don't think on the left that we are, which comes down to, in my opinion, a psychological error and bias. And while people on the left may point the finger at conservatives and say that they are selfish in their behaviors, I think oftentimes progressive center-left voters are very much righteous in how they approach issues. Why don't you believe what I believe? Don't you care about the issues that I care about? Why don't you? And if you don't, I'm going to judge you for that. I am not going to take the time to better understand your worldview, how you came to that, the events and situations that resulted in those belief systems. And in turn, we completely discount other possibilities. And again, what I'm hoping for, what I am trying to push for, is not only a little bit of greater empathy towards the people that you disagree with, but also a little bit more of a self-reflection from individuals and on the issues that they care about. For example, here in Minneapolis, we had an ordinance. Excuse me, not an ordinance. It was a proposal to the city council that would allow lower rent housing in my neighborhood. I live in a very liberal neighborhood, but the proposal got shot down. Why? Because it's very much a not in my backyard type situation. And this plays out in the research. We are okay with certain interventions if they don't affect our livelihood and our economic situation. And I can say that as a person who has felt that way in the past and currently. And that's where you really have to check yourself about why am I believe one thing, right? I want this greater good. I want to help others. Yet at the same time, I am doing things, I'm voting on things that don't see those things through. And why is that? And being honest with yourself. And, to bring it back to Bitcoin, that's one of those things that I love about Bitcoin is that I can selfishly stack sats. I can buy Bitcoin, but I know that that also benefits other holders. And for me, that makes it one of the best, if not the best, socially conscious investments out there. And I put investments in quotations because obviously that's that word as used with Bitcoin is complicated, but we don't need to get into that.
Yeah. And you know, there's so much vacillation with the left, the right, the progressive movement. People are kind of flummoxed on where do they stand on certain beliefs and certain disbeliefs. And I think that, like you said, Bitcoin is the best silent protest because you can buy into this asset and you don't necessarily have to have a political view of anything. You know, you're helping it's the people's money, right? It's money united under math. So I think that as time progresses, you're going to start to see more people buying into Bitcoin, hopefully, and they're going to see how it's going to start to actually change the political spectrum. You have a lot of politicians now campaigning, asking for Bitcoin, utilizing Bitcoin, trying to get monetary policy in there, like Senator Lumens, for example. And I think that your podcast is a gem because even for you wanting to learn more about other people's opinions and their political spectrums, I think that the Progressive Bitcoiner podcast is really opening up that window for you to go back and listen to every episode and to see how multifaceted Bitcoiners are and their approach to life and society. And I think that, you know, it's one of those beautiful things that a lot of people need to get on board with.
Well, you're absolutely right. You know, you take, for example, the current discussion in Bitcoin Twitter land about maximalism and toxic maximalism and the culture of Bitcoin. And I kind of, you know, take issue with the whole idea of it because it pigeonholes Bitcoin into Bitcoin Twitter, right? Yeah. And you think about the millions of other users around the world, and it's like it has nothing to do what's going on with Twitter, and very much becomes this myopic view of what Bitcoin is, and to a certain extent, you know, augments this idea of that what Bitcoin is to a few people in the grand scheme of things on Bitcoin Twitter is what Bitcoin culture is, which is garbage. Is a terrible take that, you know, setting aside the. So my point is that there's an asterisk there. We can talk about Bitcoin culture, but it's Bitcoin culture within Bitcoin Twitter land within the United States, right? So we need to take this broader worldview of what it is, and ultimately what it is what it means for the individual, and nothing more, nothing less.
100%. You know, Bitcoin means different things for different people. Why should your generation care about Bitcoin?
I don't know if I'm 42, so I think that puts me on the young side of Gen X. I don't know if there's a generational reason for that's specific to my demographic. I would look at it again, if we're going to look at it through the lens of my generation within the United States, then I think you can approach it from two perspectives that are complementary, in my opinion. One, one is the financial instrument element, and to assume that the same means for economic prosperity, financial gain, generational wealth that have been present in the past will continue into the future is an error in logic. Much like one's health, to assume that my health is going to be as good as it was in my 30s to my 40s as it will be from the 40s into my 50s is wrong. But that's what we do. I feel fine. I felt fine. I'm going to be fine. I've invested in these indices. I've got a bit of bonds, and I've got a house. I'm going to be fine. That's wrong. That's wrong because, again, what has occurred in the past is not necessarily going to be occurring in the future. And Bitcoin very much is an acknowledgement of that truism. And so by investing in Bitcoin, you acknowledge that to a certain degree, and many people still don't understand that you don't have to buy a full Bitcoin. But I think any degree being a part of your investments is appropriate. And the beautiful thing about Bitcoin is that it is the same thing to the person living in subsidized housing as it is to the billionaire. You are getting the same thing, right? You don't need accredited investor to get into Bitcoin. You don't need a credit check. You don't need all these other things that prevent many people from the investments that have benefited a certain class over the past 50 years, right? And so that's why one of the reasons why I find Bitcoin so important is that every person can be a part of the gains that will come. So that's the investment thesis, and that investment thesis does incorporate, the element of addressing wealth inequality and everything that comes with that. So I'm not skirting that issue at all. That's built into that view of Bitcoin. All right. But the other side dovetails off of that. And my generation grew up with the infomercials about, donating to people in Africa and the fundraising things for Katrina, et cetera. I don't see that as much anymore, Ukraine aside, but I think that was very much a part of how we grew up, as this belief and idea of helping others, not only domestically, but abroad. And I don't see that anymore. Granted, I don't watch television anymore, so maybe it's still there, but I certainly don't get a sense of that on social media or the TV that I have seen in passing. So again, I see Bitcoin as that donation, as that fundraising, as those organizations that seek to benefit people worldwide. So if you care about those things, then Bitcoin should be something that is on your radar as a means to benefit everybody who's within the network. So my pitch to my generation are those elements as they relate to Bitcoin.
Yeah, and what's interesting too is, like, me being a millennial, there's been a lot of campaigns around the same things that you're talking about, but I think that my generation, we didn't see the end results, right? We still see starving children in Africa. We still see people struggling in El Salvador. We still see people struggling in some of these other third world countries. And just for me personally, in my personal opinion, I've seen Bitcoin change people's lives. I've seen Bitcoin help people with remittances in Nigeria, help my family out, transfer money peer to peer. So when you say these things, it really makes sense. And I love to source this from a wide array of people and from different generations to get their perspective on Bitcoin. So thank you, Mark, for breaking that down.
Absolutely.
My last question is, and usually the best question I say for last is, where do you foresee the Bitcoin movement going in the next few years?
I have no idea, Dadu. And you know what? It's a fun question to ask. I forget the exact phrase or who said it. Maybe it was, anyway, I don't remember, but that so much can happen in a year, but it feels like 10 years, something like that. And that's what it feels like with Bitcoin. There's always something happening, but then it also moves at a glacier's pace. And so, all the institutional investors that have been promised over the past couple of years haven't come yet. The nation state adoption hasn't had the domino effects yet. And so all these things that were predicted, over the past few years have yet to happen. And that's okay. And I think the predictions going forward are fun, but aren't necessarily helpful. What I do think is helpful is to think about creating the future that you want to see in Bitcoin, right? And that's what you're doing. That's what I'm doing. And what does that mean for me, and I'm assuming presumably you, is that we want as many people to be brought into this network as we can, because we believe it to be a good force, a force for good, because we believe that it is going to benefit the people who are currently the worse off, both within the United States and worldwide. And so you're doing that with your writing, you're doing that with your podcast now. I'm trying to do that with my podcast and minimal writing. And that's the future that I want to see in Bitcoin, is that it brings for more people under its umbrella, and over time brings them out of poverty, is also improves their lives. That's fundamentally what any intervention at any point in our lives is about. It's trying to improve our lives and minimize downside. And that's what I think Bitcoin allows for. It allows everything that is a monetary and economic phenomenon to improve in one's life. And as I've argued, that's very much health is dependent upon that, and everything downstream from that. How can we expect people to give a damn about climate change or other social issues if they're struggling to make ends meet, if they don't have their health there to not worry about, and in turn be able to care about these other things? I don't think that is possible. I think it's so easy to ignore these other broader issues if you're missing that foundation. You can't jump from lack of shelter, lack of health, lack of economic security to personal growth and what's the word I'm looking for? Basically working your way up higher up on the hierarchy of needs. You can't jump from one to the other. And so that's where I see, again, Bitcoin as being fundamental to that. It further solidifies, makes stronger that economic base for individuals over time, further lifting their livelihood, their economic situation, which in turn has downstream effects on their health, which in turn will have downstream effects on who they are as individuals within society, and being able to look out for others. Let me try to narrow that down a little bit further. I think it's harder for people to give a damn about others when they're struggling themselves, right? And that is fundamentally an economic problem. And one could argue maybe to a lesser degree, health is a part of that too. In order, again, for people to give a damn about others, to care about some of these more existential threats, they have to be able to offload that cognitive burden that is, how am I going to make ends meet? How am I going to take care of my family, let alone others? If you can remove that burden, I think what you'll see is the ability to care about others more, to be able to care about yourself more. And in turn, I see that as an overall net benefit to society, to the world.
Yeah, 100%, Mark. And, I think there's going to be two profound topics that are Bitcoiners or people that adopt Bitcoin will have to kind of go through as a form of trial and tribulation. The first one is going to be overcoming survival mode. And then once you do overcome that, overcoming survivor's remorse. And I think that all the things that you're talking about the future of Bitcoin is spot on, because so many people are just trying to survive right now. We had the pandemic. People are stressing about their health. They're stressing about finances. And the two things won't jive good unless there's balance. And there has to be balance within yourself Your chakras have to be in line. Your health has to be in line. And then you can start to worry about your finances. And I think that there's so many people struggling right now. There's a possible recession coming. The price of Bitcoin is down. And I think that this is a good time to listen to podcasts like this, listen to people like yourself, the Progressive Bitcoiner, and really take time to study and learn, because everything is temporary. Everything goes in cycles. And, you know, what we're seeing now may not be the same thing 6 months from now. So, you know, I appreciate you, Mark, for really, really giving deep insight into health, Bitcoin, the progressive movement, and what that looks like for the future. So, Mark, just give people, you know, your last set of shout outs, or any way that people can get you on social media, things of that nature.
Yeah, I'll say one final thing here, which made me think of with regard to your comment of survivor's remorse. And it's maybe the one few things that Mike Novogratz said that I would agree with, and that's be a baller, meaning be generous. Yep. And that is what we're going to need in this time going forward, because I think there's going to be a lot of anger for people who aren't on this boat. Yep. And the only way to help mitigate that is to be generous with your time, be generous with your resources, and try to help people not only onto the boat, but also just even survive. Yep. And so be a baller, be generous, be kind, don't get triggered. And because extending that hand is far and away more gratifying than any green candle out there. And I can't emphasize that enough. As far as send-offs, at the Progressive Bitcoiner, BTCR on Twitter, and then the website, the Progressive Bitcoiner info.com. And there you'll see all the episodes for our podcast, as well as a curated resources page for articles addressing a lot of the issues that we've talked about with regard to how Bitcoin can help foster positive changes for individuals in the communities that they live in, both here domestically as well as internationally. And very proud of what we've created. And again, very grateful for having me on your podcast, Dadu.
Once again, Mark, Stephany, thank you for coming on the Bitcoin Source and giving people, you know, insight and light on how you source your Bitcoin. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Dadu.